Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today's video, we're gonna discuss all the different ways that brands are lying to you. No, but seriously, I have compiled a list of all the different forms of greenwashing brands are now trying to use to make them seem more sustainable than they are. And I thought it would be fun to go through them, give you guys real life examples of when brands have done this to try trick you, and also some handy tips about how to spot each different one. Obviously, this kind of ironically ties in really nicely with the video I did recently talking about how sustainable fashion language has got needlessly complex, because we're about to go through 5, 6, 7 different versions of the same word basically. Greenwashing is where brands try to convince you that they are more sustainable than they are. And all of these different versions I'm about to roll through essentially boil down to that same concept. So yeah, just something to think about while we go through the list. We're going to start off with ordinary greenwashing, just to ease us into it. An interesting example I found here is Uniqlo burning clothes. I found this example through the website greenwash.com, which is a really good resource if you are interested in this. It has so many different examples by sector, including fashion. But they claim that Uniqlo uses its take back scheme, Re-Uniqlo, to allow customers to give back their unwanted clothing, and that clothing will be burned. Clothes that Uniqlo deem unwearable will be turned into solid pellets and then used as industrial fuel. According to this website, Uniqlo claim that this is a substitute for fossil fuels, but the majority of Uniqlo's clothing is fossil fuel based. It's made from polyester, which is derived from oil. Instead of taking customers' unwanted clothing and recycling that into new clothing, or donating it to areas of need, or finding some other service for this clothing, Uniqlo are apparently burning it, completely wasting that textile that's been produced and creating more fossil fuels in the process, whilst trying to make it look like they care about the environment. I'd say a really good mentality to have with greenwashing in terms of how to spot it is, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. There's always going to be an incentive for a brand to do something, whether it's better public opinion or whether it's cash grabbing. You need to look at exactly how the brand is benefiting. And if it seems like they're not benefiting in a way, then either it's false or it's only good PR. Okay, moving on to the next term, which is greenlighting. This is when brands use communications or marketing to point out particular features of their company which are sustainable, to try divert your attention from another area of their operations where they're not doing as well. I think an example of this that I pointed out actually in one of my H&M investigation videos was when H&M started offering in-store secondhand clothing options. Interestingly enough, they didn't use the clothing that they were already getting from customers with their in-store take-back scheme. When I did a bit of digging, I found out that they were using a third party to find this secondhand clothing and offer it in store. It was already curated for them and they could match it to a specific vibe. But it seemed like the perfect option to use the clothing they were already generating from this take-back scheme. And it made me think why they weren't using that. It would have also been really good PR to do this. They could have shouted about it from the rooftops about actual closed loop recycling. There must be a reason why they aren't. And I think the reason is that they aren't really doing much with the clothing they're getting from the take-back schemes. It will be too much work and investment to sort through this clothing they're receiving and turn it into curated pieces that they can sell in store. No, they're probably shipping it through Global South waste colonialism networks and it's ending up on a beach somewhere in Ghana. And meanwhile, they're trying to convince you that they are an environmentally conscious company who offers secondhand options in store, but that secondhand clothing hasn't really cost them much. Yes, they're working with a third party, but it's a lot less time and a lot less investment to do that rather than investing in their own infrastructure. The way to kind of spot greenlighting is to look between the lines and think about what brands aren't telling you, or what they've purposely missed out, or what you would be expecting them to say. And if they haven't said it, then there's probably a reason. I think another example of this is when brands go on and on about their carbon offsetting schemes and tell you about how they're planting trees or doing their best to mitigate their environmental impact. And all this is to distract you from the fact that they're not investing and they're not looking into how to actually reduce their carbon output. They just want to mitigate it. Next term is greenhushing, and I think it's one that more people probably know about. But it's when corporate communications deliberately underreport or hide their sustainability credentials for fear of public scrutiny. A really good example of this was Earth Day this year. Earth Day and the month around it is when we would typically see a lot of information from brands and a lot of PR about the sustainability plays they're currently making and how they're trying to make their company a lot better. But we didn't really see that this year. I think a lot of publications were reporting on this silence from brands and how it speaks to the fact that they're too afraid of public scrutiny, or they haven't really made enough progress and they have nothing to shout about. And silence is better than the truth there. Obviously, this makes it quite hard to spot because what you're looking for is silence or the absence of news. If your favorite brand hasn't posted about what they're doing in a while, then it may be time to check in on them. You could call them out. You could ask them, hey, how's the sustainability going, in the comments of their latest post, and see what happens. I think a really good brand to compare your favorite one to is Garni. Garni have a dedicated sustainability page on Instagram called Garni Lab, and it goes into all of their progress and decision making when it comes to sustainability, and it's honestly one of my favorite brand accounts on social media. Another term that you might be familiar with, maybe not in name, but in concept, is green labeling. This is when brands imply a product or a collection is green and sustainable, but it's misleading. It can include things that make the product seem more eco-friendly than it is, like sustainability buzzwords all over it, or green packaging even. Obviously, there's no short of examples here, since every single fast fashion sustainability collection falls under this term. They try to make this sustainability collection out to be something that's going to help the planet, but they're producing it at the same time as they're producing millions of garments worth of waste that don't fall into this category, and they don't address that at all. They don't address overproduction, they don't address the supply chains where they're exploiting workers, and the fact that this sustainability collection was probably made in the same place as their regular collection. They don't talk about any of that. They just slap on a green background and they call it a day. I found this example from Shein, and I think it's really kind of funny. The fact that they've put cheap polyester clothing that's mass produced on a model that's standing in front of a forest and making you think that they care about the planet is laughable. But we, the consumer, are supposed to believe that because she's standing in front of a nature background, that Shein cares about the planet that they're actively destroying. I think this one's pretty easy to spot actually, and we've had a lot of practice since there's been quite a few high-profile cases of brands being called out for this. But in general terms, be wary of any fashion editorial content that's based in nature. Ask yourself whether the brand is doing this deliberately to try to distract you from their environmental impact. Every single thing in a marketing campaign is there for a reason. It's there to suggest to you something about the brand or the products. And we need to read between the lines of what brands want us to believe to see what they're actually trying to do. The next is greenshifting. This happens when companies try to shift the blame onto consumers, putting the responsibility on them to consume less or to take better care of their clothing, rather than addressing their role in overproduction and unsustainable practices. I didn't even have to really research this one before the best example came to me, because I remembered it so well from when it first came out. In an interview with Zara's non-executive chair, Marta Ortega Perez, she spoke about how she doesn't see Zara as a fast fashion brand, because fast fashion brings to mind unsold clothing and cheap clothing, which could not be further from what they do there. The point that really got me was the fact that she tried to say that Zara is based on consumer demand alone, and therefore consumers are the reason why Zara is producing so much cheap, bad quality clothing. Therefore, it's our fault that Zara isn't sustainable enough, because we want the cheap clothing. So who are they to say no to us? I think this one is the most infuriating one of the whole list. And I really want us to get good at spotting it so we can call out brands more when they do this. Brands should not really be focusing on us as consumers, especially when it comes to talking about environmental impact and how they can be a more sustainable business. They need to be focusing on what they're doing, and saying anything about the consumer is an immediate red flag to me. Another layer here I want to point out is green shifting in industry. For example, luxury fashion brands often shift the blame of the environmental impacts of fashion onto fast fashion companies, saying that they're a lot worse and implying that luxury fashion is in another tier altogether and it's almost inherently sustainable. But this isn't true either. Luxury fashion has a lot of problems when it comes to sustainability, just like fast fashion does. Maybe they're different problems, maybe they overlap in some places, but you can't suggest that fast fashion needs to be the only one to change their ways and the industry will immediately benefit from it. Luxury fashion brands also have a lot of work to do. The next one is green crowding, and this is when brands stay hidden within a crowd of other brands to avoid having their unsustainable practices revealed or to avoid having their lack of progress shown. Like joining a coalition of brands looking to make progress towards sustainable fashion. A good example here is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. It has a lot of different brands signed up with promises to achieve things like decarbonizing the fashion industry and get it to a 45% reduction by 2030. But the industry's emissions have just been revealed as going the wrong way. They're actually producing more carbon emissions than they were when this alliance was signed. The same thing happened with the Fashion Pact. 160 brands pledged to have 50% renewable energy in their supply chains by 2025 and 100% renewable energy by 2030. The collective target looks to be within reach, but this is because of a few front-running brands that achieved this almost immediately since the pact was signed, and the few stragglers are benefiting from the overall appearance that the pact has been reached. Thankfully, this means green crowding is kind of easy to spot. If you see that a brand has joined a coalition or formed a pact with a group of other brands, you just need to ask yourself why. Why are they benefiting? Why would they want to hide amongst other brands? Because if a brand wanted to decarbonize their supply chains that much, why can't they do that by themselves? Mostly brands sign up to these pacts for accountability or for good PR. They're not actually inherently interested in what they're promising. They just want you to think that they are. I'm not saying that every coalition or every pact is like this, but I think you have some brands that are like this in every pact. Okay, almost at the end. The next one is purposewashing. This is when a brand says that it stands for something bigger than profit but fails to deliver. And a really good example is Patagonia. There was big news a couple of years ago that the owners of Patagonia had transferred ownership to a Patagonia trust where the profits would go towards combating climate change. There was a lot of good PR from this move, and Patagonia seemed like the most sustainable company in the world at that point. However, it came out that Patagonia was using the same sweatshops as fast fashion companies. One of the managers at said factories said that he really couldn't tell the difference between working for Patagonia and any other fast fashion brand. This is purpose washing because whilst Patagonia was obviously trying to do something towards making an actual impact towards climate change, they weren't looking inwards and looking at their own supply chains and whether they could be better. It's pretty hard to spot this without the gift of foresight, but in general, brands are pretty much always looking to make a profit. Without being pessimistic, it could just be easier to always question what they're getting out of a situation when they say they want to fight for something. The last term is greenrinsing. This is when a company constantly changes its ESG targets right before they're achieved. Or they can change the parameters around an ESG target to make it easier to achieve. Or in order to evade scrutiny, say if they weren't going to make that target, then changing the target will mean that they avoid the bad press in theory. A really good example here is the brand Crocs, which pushed back their targets towards net zero for the whole company from 2030 to 2040. This is after they recorded a 45.5 increase on their absolute emissions in 2023. They knew they weren't going to make this target and they knew they'd given themselves too little time to make it. So they pushed it back 10 years so that when 2030 came along and they hadn't reached the target, it didn't look as bad. Thankfully, this is also really easy to spot. Basically, anytime a brand says that they're changing a target or making it further away, you have to question why. Why haven't they been able to achieve that target in the time frame they initially gave? What's changed? Is it actually a limitation from an outside source, or have they just not invested enough in making progress? I think that's all the terms I have to share with you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope it's been informative, and I hope it makes it easier for you to spot greenwashing in action in all of its forms. Let me know if you have any other terms I've missed out or have been created. I know they're being created all of the time, and whilst that is infuriating, it's also kind of interesting. So I'd be interested to hear them. But thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you really soon. Bye.